The office was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning, even with Christmas Eve just hours away. Most of the staff had taken the day off, leaving the Pellagrini building practically empty except for security and a handful of essential personnel. I sat at my desk outside Roberto's office, fingers flying across the keyboard as I finished organizing the last quarterly reports before the holiday break. 3 years. 3 years I'd worked as Roberto Pellegrini's executive secretary, and I still couldn't quite figure him out. He was precise, demanding, and maintained an emotional distance that felt more like a fortress than simple professional boundaries. I'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight tightening of his jaw when something displeased him, the way his fingers would tap once against his desk when he was thinking through a problem. I'd also learned, somewhere along the way, that I was hopelessly attracted to a man who barely seemed to notice I existed beyond my ability to manage his schedule and filter his calls. My phone buzzed. A text from Courtney Wells, my only real friend in this world of expensive suits and carefully measured words. Lunch in 20? There's a holiday market near the gallery district. I need to escape this place before I strangle someone with tinsel. I smiled despite myself. Courtney worked in accounting, 3 floors down, and had somehow decided I was worth befriending when I'd started here. She was blunt, funny, and completely unimpressed by the power dynamics that made everyone else in the building walk on eggshells. "Meet you in the lobby," I typed back. Roberto's door opened. He stepped out, already reaching for his coat with that fluid economy of movement that characterized everything he did. At 35, he commanded attention without trying. Dark hair, dark eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that made rooms go quiet when he entered them. "I have a meeting across town," he said without preamble. "I won't be back until after 6. If Rinaldi calls, tell him I'll have an answer by tomorrow." "Of course, Mr. Pellegrini." His gaze flickered to me briefly, and I caught something in his expression I couldn't quite name. He looked tired, I realized. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying weight that never lightened. "Take an extended lunch if you'd like," he added, surprising me. "It's Christmas Eve. You shouldn't be stuck here all day." "Thank you, sir." He nodded once and was gone, leaving only the faint trace of his cologne in the air. Cedar and something darker. Something I'd never been able to identify, but that I associated entirely with him. 20 minutes later, Courtney and I were walking through the holiday market she'd mentioned, our breath visible in the cold December air. Vendors had set up along 2 blocks, selling everything from handmade ornaments to overpriced hot chocolate. "You have that look again," Courtney said, linking her arm through mine. "What look?" "The one where you're thinking about him but pretending you're not." I felt heat creep up my neck despite the cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Come on, it's Christmas Eve. Let's find something ridiculously expensive that we can't afford and then talk ourselves out of buying it. It's tradition." We wandered through the stalls, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in days. The market had that particular kind of magic that only seemed to exist during the holidays, when everything felt suspended between ordinary life and something warmer, more hopeful. Then I saw the sign. Estate sale auction, Gallery 12, today only, noon to 4 p.m. "Oh no," Courtney said, following my gaze. "I know that look too. That's your, I'm about to do something impulsive look." "I'm not impulsive. You bought a $200 coat last month because you said it reminded you of something your aunt used to wear. I had done that. And I'd regretted it immediately, but the coat had looked so much like the one Aunt Marie wore in the only photo I had of us together. She'd raised me after my parents died when I was 15, and losing her 2 years ago had left me feeling untethered in ways I still hadn't processed. "Just 5 minutes," I said. "I want to look." The gallery was smaller than I expected, but beautifully appointed. Items were arranged on tables with printed descriptions and starting bid amounts. Most of it was beyond my budget, jewelry and artwork that belonged in museums rather than in my tiny apartment. Then I saw it. A pocket watch, antique gold, sitting on a velvet cushion. The case was engraved with delicate scrollwork, and even from a distance, I could see initials carved into the metal. GP. My heart did something strange in my chest. I moved closer, drawn by an instinct I couldn't explain. The description card read, "Ladies' pocket watch, circa 1950s, Italian craftsmanship, gold-plated with original chain. Minor wear consistent with age. Starting bid, $250. GP, Giuliana Pellagrini. I knew the name from the few times Roberto had mentioned his mother over the past 3 years. She'd died 12 years ago, though he never spoke about how or why. I'd seen her photo once, on his desk. A beautiful woman with warm eyes and Roberto's same dark hair. "Vanessa, what are you doing?" Courtney appeared at my elbow. "That's gorgeous, but it's also way out of your price range. You can't seriously be considering, how much do I have in checking right now?" She blinked. "I don't know, maybe $500 if you haven't paid rent yet this month." "Why? Can I borrow $50? Are you insane? That's a pocket watch from someone's dead grandmother. What are you going to do with it?" I couldn't explain it, not in a way that would make sense. But standing there, looking at those initials, I felt absolutely certain of 2 things. First, this watch had belonged to Roberto's mother. And second, he needed to have it back. "Trust me," I said quietly. Courtney stared at me for a long moment, then sighed and pulled out her wallet. "You're lucky I love you, and that it's Christmas. But if this turns out to be some weird stalker thing, I'm staging an intervention." The auction for the watch happened 20 minutes later. 3 other people bid against me, driving the price up in $50 increments. My palms were sweating by the time I raised my paddle for $300, certain I was about to be outbid. "Sold to number 47, the auctioneer called. I nearly collapsed with relief and terror in equal measure. I'd just spent $300, money I absolutely should have saved for January rent, on a watch I wasn't even certain belonged to who I thought it did. "You're going to give it to him, aren't you?" Courtney said as we left the gallery, the watch wrapped carefully in tissue paper and nestled in a small velvet box. "I don't know yet. Liar. You know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to give your boss, who barely knows you exist outside of scheduling meetings, an expensive personal gift at the company Christmas party tonight. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, I thought. Absolutely everything. But when I got home that evening and unwrapped the watch again, examining it under my desk lamp, I found an engraving inside the case. "To Giuliana, my light. Forever, A." Roberto's father had been named Antonio. I made my decision. The Pellagrini corporate Christmas party was held in the building's top floor event space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city lights. It was elegant, but restrained, much like Roberto himself. The staff mingled with champagne and carefully plated appetizers, while instrumental versions of Christmas classics played softly in the background. I'd changed into the nicest dress I owned, a deep burgundy that Courtney had helped me pick out last year. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Just presentable. Roberto stood near the windows, surrounded by a small group of senior associates. He wore a black suit with a crisp white shirt, no tie, the top button undone in a rare concession to the festive atmosphere. He was listening to something Joseph Rinaldi was saying, nodding occasionally, but his posture suggested his mind was elsewhere. The small box felt impossibly heavy in my clutch. "You're stalling," Courtney murmured, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. She pressed one into my hand. "Either do it or don't, but stop looking like you're about to throw up. It's making me nervous. What if I'm wrong? What if it's not even hers? Then he'll politely say thank you, and you'll die of embarrassment, but survive. Come on, Vanessa. You've been invisible to this man for 3 years. Maybe it's time he actually saw you." That stung, probably because it was true. I was good at my job, efficient and reliable. But Roberto Pellagrini looked through me the same way he looked through everyone who worked for him. We were functions, not people. Except sometimes, very occasionally, I'd catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. As if he were trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't realized existed. I drained half the champagne in one swallow, set the glass down, and crossed the room before I could talk myself out of it. The group around Roberto quieted as I approached. Joseph raised an eyebrow but stepped back slightly, making space. "Mr. Pellagrini," I said, proud that my voice came out steady. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I have something for you. A Christmas gift." His dark eyes fixed on me with that unnerving intensity he sometimes displayed. Up close, I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. Miss Morgan. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. That's not necessary. I know. But I'd like you to have it anyway. I held out the small velvet box, wrapped simply in silver paper with a white ribbon. My hand trembled slightly, betraying my nerves. Roberto took it slowly, his fingers brushing mine for just a moment. The room had gone quiet around us, I realized. People were watching. He unwrapped the paper with careful precision, opened the box, and went completely still. The change in him was instant and devastating. Color drained from his face. His hands, usually so steady, began to shake as he lifted the pocket watch from its cushion. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "There was an estate auction today at Gallery 12. I saw it and thought, I wasn't sure, but the initials I thought perhaps it might have belonged to. Everyone out." The two words, delivered with quiet authority, sent the entire room into motion. Associates filed toward the exit without question, glasses abandoned, conversations cut short. Joseph paused at the door, looking back at Roberto with concern, but a single shake of his head sent even him away. Then it was just the two of us, standing in the sudden emptiness of the vast room. Roberto was still staring at the watch, his thumb tracing over the engraved initials with something that looked like disbelief. "This is my mother's watch," he said finally. "It disappeared the night she died. 12 years ago. The police never found it." My stomach dropped. "I didn't know. I just saw the initials and thought, how did you know about my mother's name? You mentioned her once. 2 years ago, you had a call from someone asking about a charity she'd supported. You told them Juliana would have wanted the donation to continue." He looked up at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded. "You remembered that. I remember everything you tell me," I said quietly. "It's my job." "No," he shook his head slowly. "Remembering scheduling conflicts is your job. Remembering dead mothers is something else entirely." He moved to one of the windows, still holding the watch, and stood there for a long moment staring out at the city. I should have left. Should have given him privacy. But my feet wouldn't move. "She was wearing this the night she was killed," Roberto said without turning around. "The police report noted it missing. They assumed the killer took it, maybe sold it. But there was never any trace. And now you walk in here on Christmas Eve and hand it to me like it's nothing. I'm so sorry. If I'd known..." "No." He turned, and the intensity in his gaze pinned me in place. "Don't apologize. You gave me back something I thought was lost forever. Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head mutely. "It means whoever killed my mother made a mistake. After 12 years of silence, they or someone connected to them sold this watch. Which means there's a trail. Which means I can finally find them." His hands were steady now, I noticed. The initial shock had transformed into something sharper, more focused. "The auction," he continued, moving toward me with purpose. "I need to know everything. Who ran it? Who provided the items? Did you get a catalog? A receipt?" "Yes, I have the catalog at home. The auction house is listed. They said the watch was part of an anonymous estate donation from somewhere in Connecticut." "Connecticut." Something flickered across his face. "Show me. Tomorrow. I need to see everything." "Of course, Mr. Pellagrini." "Roberto." I blinked. "What?" "When it's just us, call me Roberto." He stepped closer. Close enough that I could smell cedar again. Could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "You've worked for me for 3 years. You remember conversations I barely remember having. You just gave me the first real lead in my mother's murder investigation in over a decade. I think we're past formalities. Roberto," I whispered, testing the name. "Better." The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual expression. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you buy it? $300 is not nothing. Why spend that on something you weren't even certain about?" I hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much. "You always look sad during the holidays." I thought if it was hers, if it meant something to you, maybe it would help. I didn't think about the murder or investigations. I just wanted you to have something that mattered. He stared at me for so long I started to worry I'd said something terribly wrong. Then he reached out and touched my hand. Just briefly, his fingers warm against mine. "Thank you, Vanessa." Truly. It was the first time he'd used my first name. The first time he'd touched me beyond a professional handshake. The first time he'd looked at me like I was a person rather than a function. And standing there in the empty party space with Christmas lights reflecting off the windows, I realized with absolute certainty that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't begin to predict. "You should go enjoy the rest of your evening," Roberto said, stepping back. "We'll talk tomorrow, first thing. Are you sure you're all right?" He looked down at the watch in his palm, then back at me. "No, but I will be, because of you." I left him there, alone with his memories and his mother's watch, and tried to ignore the way my heart was racing. Courtney was waiting by the elevators, eyes wide with curiosity. "What happened?" "Everyone's talking." "What did you give him?" "Something that used to belong to his mother." "Oh my God. Vanessa, what are you getting yourself into?" I watched the elevator numbers descend, each floor taking me farther from Roberto and that moment of connection that had felt both terrifying and inevitable. "I have no idea," I admitted. "But I don't think I can stop now." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Roberto's face when he opened that box. The way his hands had trembled. The rawness in his voice when he'd asked how I found it. By the time dawn broke over the city, I was already dressed and making coffee, trying to organize my thoughts and the auction materials I'd promised to show him. My phone buzzed at 7:30 in the morning, a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Morgan, this is Joseph Rinaldi. Mr. Pellagrini would like you to come to his residence this morning at 9. I'm sending a car to your address now. It will arrive in 20 minutes. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, heart racing. Roberto's residence. In all 3 years of working for him, I'd never been to his home. Our interactions existed entirely within the controlled environment of the office, where everything was professional and carefully boundaried. Now I was being summoned to his private space on Christmas morning, and I had no idea what to expect. The car that arrived was sleek and black, the kind that screamed money and power. The driver was professional and silent, offering nothing beyond a polite nod. We drove through Manhattan's quieter holiday streets, eventually pulling up to a beautiful brownstone in the Upper East Side that managed to look both elegant and understated. Joseph Rinaldi met me at the door. He was a large man, probably in his late 40s, with the kind of alert presence that suggested he missed very little. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. "Miss Morgan, thank you for coming on short notice. Mr. Pellagrini is in his study. This way, please." I followed him through a foyer that took my breath away. Dark hardwood floors gleamed under soft lighting. Original artwork hung on cream-colored walls. But what struck me most was how lived in it felt. This wasn't a showpiece designed by some expensive decorator. This was a home. We passed a living room where I caught a glimpse of family photographs on a mantel, a kitchen with copper pots hanging from hooks, and herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill. Everything spoke of someone who actually inhabited this space, who cooked and read and lived here. "Coffee?" Joseph asked as we paused outside a closed door. "Thank you, but I'm already jittery." He nodded with something that might have been approval. "Fair warning, he didn't sleep much last night. He's been making calls since 5 in the morning." Joseph knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for a response. Roberto's study was exactly what I would have expected if I'd ever let myself imagine it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with volumes in what looked like multiple languages. A massive desk dominated the space, papers spread across its surface in organized chaos. But what caught my attention was the piano in the corner, a beautiful upright with sheet music still resting on the stand. Roberto stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian. He was dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him. Dark jeans, a gray Henley that showed the lines of his shoulders and arms. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He glanced up when we entered, and something in his expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but acknowledging my presence in a way that felt significant. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, switching to English. He ended the call, and crossed to where I stood. Vanessa, thank you for coming. Of course. I brought everything from the auction. I pulled the catalog and receipt from my bag, along with the business card the gallery owner had given me. Roberto took them carefully, studying each document with intense focus. His fingers traced over the listings, pausing at the entry for his mother's watch. Estate donation from Connecticut, anonymous seller, he read aloud. 2 weeks ago. Joseph, can you? Already on it, boss. I've got contacts at the auction house. Give me an hour. Joseph left, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed felt weighted, full of things neither of us quite knew how to say. Would you like coffee? Roberto asked, gesturing to a small setup near the bookshelf. I made a pot about an hour ago. It's probably still good. The domesticity of the offer caught me off guard. Sure, thank you. He poured 2 cups with practiced ease, adding cream to mine without asking. I stared at him in surprise. You take it with cream, no sugar, he said, handing me the mug. You've been making my coffee for 3 years. I pay attention too. The casual revelation that he'd noticed something so small about me made warmth spread through my chest. I took a sip to cover my reaction, and nearly groaned. It was perfect, rich and smooth, and exactly how I liked it. This is really good. My mother taught me. She said life was too short to drink bad coffee. He smiled slightly, a real smile that transformed his usually guarded expression. She had very strong opinions about most things. Tell me about her, I said before I could think better of it. If you want to, I mean. You don't have to. Roberto moved to the piano, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. This was hers. She played beautifully, classical mostly, but she loved jazz too. She'd play for hours while I did homework at that desk. I could picture it. A younger Roberto, maybe 13 or 14, trying to concentrate on schoolwork while music filled the room. She was a chef, he continued. Not professionally, but she should have been. She could make anything taste extraordinary. Every Sunday she'd spend the entire day in the kitchen making these elaborate Italian meals. The whole family would come over. The house would be full of noise and laughter and the smell of garlic and tomatoes. His voice had gone soft, lost in memory. I stayed quiet, afraid to break the spell. She died on a Tuesday, December 26th, 12 years ago. Someone broke into our home while my father was at a business dinner and I was at college. They said it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing valuable was taken except her watch. Just her watch and her life. Roberto, I'm so sorry. He turned to look at me, his dark eyes shadowed with old pain. My father never recovered. He died 3 years later. Officially, it was a heart attack. But I've always believed it was grief that killed him. He loved her that much. The weight of what he was sharing settled over me. This wasn't just about solving a cold case. This was about a boy who'd lost his mother and then his father. About a man who'd been carrying that loss alone for over a decade. That's why you need to find out what happened, I said quietly. Not just for justice. For closure. Yes. He set his coffee down and picked up the auction catalog again. And now, because of you, I have the first real lead in 12 years. The watch had to come from somewhere. Someone held onto it all this time. And then for some reason decided to sell it. I need to know who and why. My phone buzzed. A text from Courtney. Are you alive? Should I be worried? Do I need to call someone? I showed Roberto the message, and he actually laughed. Your friend is protective. She thinks I'm getting in over my head. She might be right. His expression turned serious. Vanessa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you willing to help me with this investigation? It could be dangerous. Whoever killed my mother might not appreciate us digging into the past. I should have said no, should have backed away from this entire situation and returned to the safe boundaries of being his secretary. But looking at him, seeing the hope and determination in his eyes, I couldn't do it. Yes, I'll help however I can. Why? The question was direct, searching. You barely know me outside of work. This isn't your problem. Because you looked broken last night and I wanted to fix it. Because in 3 years, I've fallen for a man who barely knew I existed until yesterday, because something in me recognizes something in you. And I can't walk away from that, because it's the right thing to do," I said instead. "And because no one should have to carry something like this alone." Joseph returned before Roberto could respond, carrying a laptop. "Got something." The auction house confirmed the items came from an estate sale in Stamford, Connecticut. Small operation. Handled the liquidation of a property after the owner died last month. They sent everything to various auction houses throughout the region. "Do we have a name?" Roberto's voice had shifted back into business mode, sharp and focused. "Arbin Krasniki. 62 years old, died of cancer. The house and contents were being sold to cover medical debts." Roberto went very still. "Albanian." "Yeah. And here's where it gets interesting." Joseph turned the laptop around, showing us a grainy photograph. "This is Krasniki from about 15 years ago. He was an associate with the Albanian organization that operates out of Brooklyn. Low-level stuff, mostly, but he had connections. The Albanians have always denied any involvement in my mother's death. Maybe they were telling the truth about organization involvement," Joseph said carefully. "But this guy could have been freelancing. Or maybe he just bought the watch off whoever really did it." I studied the photograph. The man looked ordinary, unremarkable, not like someone who'd been connected to murder. "I need to know everything about him," Roberto said. "Where he worked, who he associated with, bank records if you can get them, and I want to know exactly what other items were in that estate sale. Already requested the full inventory from the auction house. Should have it by this afternoon." "Good. Vanessa, I need you to come with me to the gallery where you bought the watch. The owner might remember you, trust you more than she'd trust me. We need to find out if there's anything else she knows about where this came from." "Now?" I asked. "Yes. Time matters. If whoever sold these items realizes the watch might lead back to them, they could disappear." He looked at me intently. "Is that a problem?" I thought about my empty apartment, about the fact that I'd cleared my schedule for the holiday week, about Courtney's warning that I was getting in over my head. No problem at all. The gallery was closed for the holiday, but Roberto had ways of making things open. 20 minutes after we arrived, the owner appeared, looking flustered but cooperative. Her name was Margaret Hale, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and careful manners. "Mr. Pellagrini, I'm not sure what I can tell you that isn't already in the catalog," she said, unlocking the door and ushering us inside. "Miss Morgan purchased an item from you yesterday. A pocket watch. We're trying to track down its provenance." Margaret's gaze landed on me, and recognition flickered. "Oh yes, the young woman who was so determined. You outbid 3 other people for that watch. It belonged to my mother," Roberto said quietly. "It was stolen 12 years ago. I need to know how it ended up in your auction." Her expression softened. "I'm so sorry. All the items came from a consignment company that handles estate liquidations. They sent us photographs and descriptions. We list them. They take a cut of the sale. It's all very standardized. Do you have security footage from when the items were delivered?" "Possibly. Let me check." She disappeared into a back office. Roberto moved to stand beside me near the window. Outside, the city was slowly waking up, people emerging for post-holiday sales and late brunches. "You're very calm about all this," he observed. "Should I be panicking?" "Most people would be. You just found out you're helping investigate a 12-year-old murder connected to organized crime." I turned to look at him. "Most people haven't spent 3 years watching you work. I know how you operate, Roberto. You're methodical and careful. You wouldn't put me in actual danger." I meant it, not because I believed we were untouchable, but because you never walked into a risk blind. You planned, you layered protection, and you gave the people around you a choice. Something shifted in his expression. "You're right. I wouldn't. But that doesn't mean danger won't find us anyway." Margaret returned with a flash drive. Security footage from 2 weeks ago when the delivery was made. "You're welcome to review it." We watched the footage on her computer. 2 men, both looking professional in delivery uniforms, wheeling in boxes. One of them was older, gray-haired, with a slight accent when he spoke to Margaret. "That's him," Joseph said from behind us. I hadn't even heard him enter. "That's Krasniki. 2 weeks before he died, He personally delivered items to be auctioned. Why would he do that himself? I asked. If he was sick, why not send someone else? Roberto's jaw tightened. Because these items were important, valuable, either monetarily or for other reasons. He wanted to make sure they were handled correctly. Or, Joseph added grimly, he was tying up loose ends before he died, getting rid of evidence. We spent the next 6 hours tracking down every lead. Joseph made calls while Roberto and I reviewed documents. The auction house sent over the full inventory from Krasnicki's estate. Most of it was unremarkable, ordinary household items, and some decent antiques. But mixed in were several pieces of jewelry, artwork, and collectibles that had no clear provenance. This is a collection, Roberto said, spreading photographs across Margaret's desk. These aren't things someone accumulates normally. These are trophies. The word sent ice down my spine. You think he stole all of these? I think he acquired them through less than legal means over a long career. The watch wasn't the only thing he took. By the time we left the gallery, evening had fallen. I was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline. Roberto noticed, because of course he did. When did you last eat? He asked as we stood on the sidewalk, breath visible in the cold air. Breakfast, I think. He shook his head. Come on, there's a place nearby. Roberto, I should probably head home. It's not safe. The blunt statement stopped me cold. What? If Krasnicki was connected to my mother's murder, and his property has now been distributed through auctions, there's a chance someone is watching to see who buys what. You bought the most significant item. That makes you visible. You think someone might come after me? I think I'm not willing to take that chance. His dark eyes held mine. Stay at my house tonight. Guest room, completely separate. Joseph will be there. And we have security. Tomorrow we'll know more and can make better decisions. But tonight, I need to know you're protected. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. That staying at my boss's house, getting deeper into his personal life and his dangerous world, was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. But I looked at his face, at the genuine concern there, and found myself nodding. Okay, just for tonight. The relief in his expression was unmistakable. Thank you. And Vanessa? I know this isn't what you signed up for when you took a job as my secretary. No, I agreed. It's not, but I'm starting to think maybe it's exactly what I was supposed to find. We drove back to his brownstone through streets decorated with Christmas lights. Neither of us spoke, but the silence felt different now, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. When we arrived, Joseph was already there, and Roberto showed me to a guest room that was more luxurious than my entire apartment. Get some rest, he said from the doorway. Tomorrow we dig deeper. After he left, I stood in the unfamiliar room and tried to process everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. I'd gone from invisible secretary to active participant in a murder investigation. I was sleeping under the same roof as a man I'd been half in love with for years. A man who was finally seeing me as something more than just a function. And somewhere out there, someone who'd killed Roberto's mother might be realizing that their past was catching up with them. I called Courtney, knowing she'd be losing her mind. I'm fine, I said before she could start yelling. I'm staying at Roberto's house tonight. It's a long story. Vanessa Morgan, you have exactly 5 minutes to explain why you're sleeping at the mob boss's house on the day after Christmas. So I told her everything. The watch, the investigation, the Albanian connection, Roberto's request that I stay somewhere safe. When I finished, there was a long silence. You really like him, don't you? She finally said. Yeah, I really do. Then be careful. Not just of the murder investigation, but of your heart. Men like Roberto Pellagrini don't do casual. I know. After we hung up, I lay in the comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling. In the distance, I could hear Roberto moving around, the low murmur of his voice as he talked to Joseph. I'd crossed a threshold today, stepped from one world into another, and despite everything, despite the danger and the uncertainty, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sound of voices downstairs. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. Roberto's brownstone, the investigation, the fact that I'd agreed to stay here for my own safety. I checked my phone. 7 messages from Courtney, ranging from concern to amusement, to explicit instructions to text her every few hours, or she'd assume I'd been kidnapped. It was December 27th, and according to my calendar, I should have been enjoying a quiet week off. Instead, I was living in my boss's guest room while we tracked down leads in his mother's murder. My life had become surreal. I showered and dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, making a mental note that if I was staying longer, I'd need to go home for more things. When I finally made my way downstairs, following the smell of coffee, I found Roberto and Joseph in the kitchen, papers spread across the large island counter. Roberto looked up immediately, and something in his expression lightened when he saw me. He'd shaved, I noticed, and changed into dark slacks and a navy sweater that made his eyes look almost black. "Good morning. There's coffee, and Teresa left pastries before she went to visit her daughter." "Teresa? My housekeeper. She usually comes 3 times a week, but I gave her the holiday off." He poured me a cup of coffee without asking, adding cream just the way I liked it. The casual domesticity of the gesture made my chest feel tight. "Thank you." Joseph nodded at me in greeting. "Miss Morgan, we've been making progress. Got the full background on Krasniki this morning." I took a seat at the counter, cradling the warm mug. "What did you find?" He was born in Albania, immigrated in 1985, worked various jobs before getting involved with the Albanian organization in Brooklyn. Never arrested, but his name appeared in several investigations over the years. Money laundering mostly, some suspected involvement in stolen goods trafficking. Roberto slid a photograph across the counter to me. This was taken in 2010 at a restaurant in Brooklyn. "Recognize anyone?" I studied the grainy surveillance photo. Several men sat around a table, and there in the background, partially obscured, was the same gray-haired man from the auction house footage. "That's him, Krasniki. And these 3 men at the table are all high-ranking members of the Albanian organization. 2 of them are still active. 1 died in 2018. The weight of what he was showing me sank in. So he definitely had connections. Deep ones." Roberto's jaw tightened, which makes it even more significant that he had my mother's watch. Either he took it himself, or someone gave it to him. "There's more," Joseph said, pulling up something on his laptop. I got into his bank records. 2 weeks before the items went to auction, he moved everything he had into his daughter's name. $23,000. Not a fortune, but significant for someone who'd been living modestly. "He knew he was dying," I said quietly. "He was settling his affairs." "Exactly. And part of settling affairs meant getting rid of items he'd been holding on to. Items that could connect him to past crimes." Roberto paced to the window, staring out at the small garden behind his house. The tension in his shoulders was visible even from across the room. "I want to talk to the daughter," he said finally. "She might know something about where these items came from." "Already tracked her down," Joseph replied. "Lives in Stamford still. Works as a nurse. No criminal record, seems clean. But approaching her directly might spook her. Then we need a different approach." Roberto turned back to us, and I could see his mind working through possibilities. "Vanessa, would you be willing to go back to that gallery? Tell them you're interested in purchasing other items from the same estate? You want to set up another meeting with someone from the auction house? I want to create a situation where Krasniki's associates, if he had any, might show themselves. If someone else was involved in my mother's death, they might be nervous about these items surfacing. Nervous enough to reach out to the auction house asking questions. It was clever, I realized. Using me as bait without actually putting me in direct danger. "I can do that," I said. "You don't have to." Roberto's voice was careful. "This isn't your responsibility. I know, but I'm already involved, and I want to help." Something passed between us in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. Joseph cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I'll set it up. But we do this carefully, with full security coverage." The next 2 days passed in a strange rhythm. Roberto insisted I stay at the brownstone, and Courtney covered for me at the office, telling anyone who asked that I'd taken extended holiday time. I spent my mornings helping Roberto and Joseph sort through documents and background information. Afternoons, I'd retreat to the library upstairs, a beautiful room lined with books in Italian and English, and try to process everything that was happening. Roberto worked constantly, making calls, reviewing files, planning next steps, but he also made sure I ate, checked on me regularly, and in the evenings we'd find ourselves talking about things that had nothing to do with the investigation. I learned that he'd wanted to be an architect before family obligations pulled him into the business, that he still played piano sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, that his mother had taught him to cook, and he found it meditative when the stress of leadership became overwhelming. He learned that I'd lost my parents in a car accident when I was 15, that my aunt had raised me until she died 2 years ago, that I'd taken the job as his secretary because I needed stability and health insurance, but that I'd stayed because I found the work meaningful, even when he barely seemed to notice I existed. "I noticed," he said quietly on the second evening as we sat in his living room. "I've always noticed you, Vanessa. I just couldn't let myself acknowledge it. Why not? Because people close to me become targets. My mother died because someone wanted to hurt my family. I couldn't risk that happening again to someone I cared about. The admission hung in the air between us. Someone I cared about. Past tense, I realized. As if he'd moved beyond that fear into something else. On December 29th, everything came together. Margaret from the gallery called, exactly as we'd hoped. A man had contacted her, asking about other items from the Krasniki estate. He wanted to know if anyone had purchased multiple pieces, and if so, could he get their contact information. I told him absolutely not, Margaret said when she called to inform us. But I thought you should know someone is definitely interested. Did he leave a name? Roberto asked, phone on speaker so Joseph and I could hear. He said his name was Victor, no last name. He had an accent, Eastern European maybe. He seemed nervous. Roberto and Joseph exchanged glances. Did he say why he wanted the information? He claimed he was a collector, that these items might have historical significance to his family. But something felt off about him. After the call ended, Roberto made a decision. We're going to meet this Victor, but we do it on our terms, in a controlled environment. That's how I found myself later that afternoon, walking into a different gallery in Soho with a small jewelry box in my hand and a wire taped to my ribs. The plan was simple. I'd approach the gallery asking about consigning jewelry I'd inherited. Roberto had provided the pieces, family items from his mother's collection that he'd held on to. If Victor was watching for people interested in the Krasniki estate, he might approach me. Roberto was in a van 2 blocks away, listening to every word. Joseph and 2 other men I'd been introduced to that morning were positioned around the gallery, looking like ordinary customers. The gallery owner, a younger man named David, who knew nothing about our real purpose, was enthusiastically explaining consignment terms when I felt someone watching me. I turned slightly and saw him. Late 50s, graying hair, expensive coat, studying me with sharp attention. "Excuse me," he said, approaching with a careful smile. I couldn't help but overhear. "You're consigning jewelry? I'm considering it. These pieces belong to my grandmother. May I?" He gestured to the box. I opened it, showing him an ornate bracelet and matching earrings. His eyes widened slightly. "These are Italian, early 20th century. Beautiful craftsmanship. You know jewelry?" I kept my voice friendly, curious. "I'm a collector of sorts. Always interested in pieces with history." He paused, then added carefully, "Have you been to other galleries recently?" "I'm looking for items from a specific estate sale." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. "Actually, I bought something at an auction last week. A pocket watch. It was so beautiful I wondered if there were other pieces from the same collection." His entire demeanor changed, sharpening with interest. "The Krasniki estate? You purchased from that sale?" "I don't remember the name, but it was at Gallery 12. The watch with the initials GP. It wasn't a question. That was a significant piece. Very significant." In my ear, I heard Roberto's voice through the tiny receiver Joseph had given me. "Keep him talking. Do you know something about it?" I asked, injecting genuine curiosity into my tone. The engraving suggested it might have a story. Victor glanced around the gallery, suddenly cautious. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private? I may be able to provide information about that watch's provenance." "Why would you know about it?" Because Arben Kresniki was my uncle. And that watch should never have been sold. The admission sent ice through my veins. Your uncle? He was a complicated man who collected many things over his life. Some of those items have significant value to my family. I'd be willing to pay handsomely to recover them. I already gave the watch to someone, I said carefully. A gift. His expression darkened. That's unfortunate. Who did you give it to? A friend, someone who collects antiques. I would very much like to meet this friend. Perhaps we could arrange a trade, or I could make an offer they couldn't refuse. The threat beneath the polite words was unmistakable. Before I could respond, Joseph appeared at my elbow, smiling pleasantly, but positioning himself between Victor and me. Vanessa, there you are. Sorry I'm late. He turned to Victor with casual friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. Are you helping her with the consignment? Victor assessed Joseph, clearly recognizing something in his bearing that suggested he wasn't just a random boyfriend. Just admiring her grandmother's jewelry. Excuse me, I have another appointment. He left quickly, and I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. You did great, Joseph murmured. Come on, let's get you out of here. 15 minutes later, I was in the van with Roberto, the wire removed, my hands shaking with delayed adrenaline. Roberto took them in his touch warm and grounding. You were incredible, he said quietly. Smart, careful, exactly right. He knew about the watch. He called it significant. Because it is. Because it connects his uncle directly to my mother's murder, and he knows it. Roberto's expression was grim. Joseph is already tracking him. We'll know who Victor really is within the hour. The information came faster than expected. Victor Krasniki, Arben's nephew, had a record. Assault, extortion, suspected involvement in several organized crime operations. Currently lived in Connecticut. Worked as a so-called antiques dealer, likely a front for moving stolen goods. He wasn't just asking about the watch, Joseph explained as we sat in Roberto's study that evening. He was asking about all the items from that estate. My guess is some of them are evidence of other crimes, and he's trying to recover them before they lead back to the family. Which means Arben didn't act alone, Roberto said. Victor probably knows exactly what happened the night my mother died. So what do we do? I asked. Roberto was quiet for a long moment, staring at his mother's watch, which now sat in a place of honor on his desk. I talk to the Albanians, directly. I present what we found, and I give them a choice. Tell me everything about that night, or I assume they were complicit and act accordingly. That could start a war, Joseph said carefully. I know, but this has to end. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering, and I won't let these people think they can hide behind time and silence. After Joseph left to make arrangements for a meeting, Roberto and I sat in the dimming light of his study. The city hummed beyond the windows, millions of people going about their lives, unaware of the dangerous currents swirling in the shadows. I'm sorry you got pulled into this, Roberto said quietly. I'm not. I turned to look at him. You've been carrying this alone for 12 years. Maybe it's time someone helped share the weight. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the gesture unbearably tender. You see me. The real me. Not the reputation, or the power, or the fear. Do you know how rare that is? You see me too. For 3 years, I thought I was invisible to you, but you noticed how I take my coffee. Remembered conversations I thought you'd forgotten. You saw me all along. Yes. His thumb traced my cheekbone. I saw you, and it terrified me because I knew if I let myself feel anything, I wouldn't be able to stop. I still can't. The confession settled between us, heavy with possibility and complication. We were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, changing a dynamic that had worked for 3 years into something entirely new. What happens after this is over? I whispered. After you have your answers? I don't know. But I know I don't want to go back to pretending you're just my secretary, to seeing you every day and maintaining distance. I can't do that anymore, Vanessa. His forehead touched mine, and I breathed in the scent of him, cedar, and something uniquely Roberto. We stayed like that, suspended in the moment, neither of us quite ready to close the distance fully but unable to pull away. Tomorrow, He would meet with the Albanian organization. Tomorrow, he might get the answers he'd been seeking for over a decade. Tomorrow, everything could change again. But tonight, in the quiet of his study with his mother's watch keeping silent witness, we allowed ourselves this fragile connection. This acknowledgement that something real existed between us, something that had been growing quietly for years and could no longer be denied. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And that simple truth felt more significant than any investigation or danger we might encounter. Because for the first time since my aunt died, I didn't feel alone. And looking into Roberto's dark eyes, I knew he felt the same way. The meeting with the Albanian organization was set for December 30th at a neutral location, a restaurant in Brooklyn that had served as diplomatic ground for various families for decades. Roberto spent the morning of the 30th preparing, reviewing documents with Joseph, making calls to other associates who might have information about Albanian operations. I watched him work, seeing the layers of strategy and calculation that went into every decision. This wasn't just about confronting them with evidence. It was about positioning, about presenting strength while leaving room for negotiation, about understanding that sometimes the truth came wrapped in compromise. "I need you to go into the office this morning," Roberto said as I poured my third cup of coffee. "There are contracts that need filing before year-end, and some correspondence that can't wait until after New Year's. Joseph will drive you, and I'll have security stay with the building." The return to normal responsibilities felt jarring after days immersed in investigation. "Of course. What time is your meeting?" 2:00. "It'll take several hours, probably. I'll call you when it's done." Something in his tone made me look up. He was worried, I realized. Not about the meeting itself, but about how I'd react to being separated, to knowing he was walking into potential danger while I filed paperwork. "I'll be fine," I said quietly. "And so will you. You're too smart to let this go badly." His expression softened. 3 years, and you never once questioned my decisions or second-guessed my judgment. Even now, when you have every reason to be concerned, you trust me. Should I not? You should. I'm just not used to it mattering this much. The drive to the office felt surreal. Joseph was professional and silent, but I caught him watching me in the rearview mirror occasionally, as if assessing whether I was handling everything appropriately. When we arrived at the Pellagrini building, I felt like I was stepping back into a previous life, one that existed before pocket watches and murder investigations and late-night conversations with my boss in his study. The office was mostly empty, just a skeleton crew managing essential operations during the holiday week. I made my way to my desk, and the familiar surroundings should have been comforting, but instead felt strange, disconnected from the reality I'd been living. I'd barely settled in when Courtney appeared in my doorway, arms crossed, expression somewhere between concerned and exasperated. "Okay, we need to talk. Right now." I glanced toward Roberto's empty office, then back at my friend. "Come in. Close the door." She did, then immediately pulled a chair close to my desk and fixed me with a stare that demanded honesty. "You've been living at his house for 3 days. You look exhausted, but also like something fundamental has shifted. And before you try to deflect, I already know about the murder investigation, because I'm not stupid and I have access to some of the files you've been requesting. So talk to me, Vanessa. What is actually happening?" I wanted to maintain professional boundaries, to keep the personal separate from the professional. But Courtney had been my friend through my aunt's death, through countless lonely evenings when I felt invisible in my own life. She deserved the truth. "I found his mother's watch at an auction," I started, and then the whole story spilled out. The investigation, the Albanian connection, staying at Roberto's house, the way he'd started looking at me differently, the conversations that had revealed layers of both of us that we'd kept hidden for years. When I finished, Courtney was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I'd said. "You're falling for him," she finally stated. Not a question. I've been falling for him for 3 years. The difference is now he's falling back. "Vanessa." She leaned forward, taking my hands in hers. "I love you, so I'm going to say this as gently as I can. Men like Roberto Pellagrini exist in a world we can't fully understand. Power, danger, loyalty, violence. It's not just his job, it's his entire life. Are you really ready for what being with him would mean? I don't know, I admitted. But I know I can't go back to pretending I don't care. And I don't think he can either. Then you need to decide if you're all in or all out. Because halfway with someone like him isn't an option. It'll destroy you both. She was right, I knew. This wasn't a normal relationship where we could casually date and see where things went. Everything with Roberto carried weight. Consequences that rippled outward in ways I was only beginning to understand. We spent the next 2 hours working through the contracts and correspondence, falling into the familiar rhythm of professional tasks. But my mind kept drifting to that restaurant in Brooklyn, wondering how the meeting was going, whether Roberto was getting the answers he needed. My phone buzzed at 4:30. A text from Roberto. Meeting ongoing, running late. Stay at the office until I can send someone to get you. I showed Courtney the message. She raised an eyebrow. He's checking on you, making sure you're safe. Is that weird? It's protective, which, given what you've told me about Viktor Krasniqi sniffing around, probably isn't a bad thing. By 6 o'clock, most of the remaining staff had left. Courtney stayed with me, ordering takeout and setting up camp in Roberto's outer office like she was preparing for a siege. If you're staying, I'm staying, she declared, when I suggested she go home. Someone needs to be the voice of reason in your life, and apparently that's my job now. Joseph called at 7. Meeting's wrapping up. I'll be there in 20 minutes to pick you both up. Both? I repeated. Boss says your friend shouldn't take the subway home this late. We'll drop her off first. After we hung up, Courtney looked at me with wide eyes. He's concerned about me getting home safely? I don't even work directly for him. You're important to me, so you're important to him. Oh, you're in deep. You both are. Joseph arrived exactly 20 minutes later, and we piled into the SUV. Courtney gave her address in Queens, and we dropped her off first. She hugged me before getting out, whispering, "Be careful with your heart, but also, be brave." Then it was just Joseph and me in the vehicle, heading back to Roberto's brownstone through evening traffic. How did the meeting go? I finally asked. Joseph was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. They denied direct organizational involvement. Claimed Arben Krasniqi was operating outside official channels, that if he was involved in Mrs. Pellegrini's death, it was freelance work. Do you believe them? I believe they're scared. The boss presented evidence that was hard to refute, and he made it clear that he could make this very uncomfortable for them if they weren't forthcoming. They agreed to compensation and to provide any information they have about that night. So it worked. It worked. But it also means we're waiting on them to deliver, which puts us in a vulnerable position. The boss doesn't like waiting, especially not when answers about his mother are involved. When we arrived at the brownstone, Roberto was already there, standing in the living room with a glass of something amber in his hand, staring into the unlit fireplace. He looked exhausted, the weight of the day etched into his posture. "Thank you, Joseph," he said without turning around. "That's all for tonight." After Joseph left, silence settled over the house. I set my bag down, unsure whether to approach or give Roberto space to process whatever had happened at that meeting. He made the decision for me, turning and crossing the room to where I stood. Without a word, he pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly against him. I could feel the tension in his body, the barely controlled emotion he was containing. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly, my face pressed against his shoulder. "I don't know." His voice was rough. "They claim my mother's death was a transaction gone wrong, that Krasniqi was hired by someone outside their organization to handle a problem, and that she was collateral damage. They say they'll provide documentation, recordings if they exist. Anything that might identify who actually ordered it. That's good, isn't it? That's progress. It's something. But it also means my mother was murdered over business, over money or territory or some petty power play. She wasn't even the target. She was just in the way." The pain in those words cut through me. I pulled back enough to see his face, to see the grief and anger warring in his expression. "Roberto, she wasn't collateral damage. She was your mother. And she mattered. And finding out who took her from you matters. The why doesn't change that." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "How do you always know what to say?" Because I lost my parents too. I know what it feels like to need answers, even when those answers hurt. We stood there for a long moment, and I saw him struggling with something, some decision he was trying to make. Finally, he stepped back, creating distance that felt deliberate. Vanessa, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. My heart sank. This was the speech where he told me to leave, to go back to my normal life, to forget everything that had happened between us. When I hired you 3 years ago, it was because you were competent, professional, and came with excellent references. I needed someone who could manage chaos without creating more of it. That's all you were supposed to be. I nodded, bracing myself for what came next. But somewhere along the way, you became more than that. You became the only stable constant in a life that feels like it's constantly shifting. You walk into my office every morning, and for those few minutes when we review my schedule and discuss priorities, I feel grounded, like there's at least one aspect of my existence that makes sense. Roberto, let me finish. His expression was intense, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. Today, sitting in that meeting with the Albanians, negotiating over my mother's death like it was a business transaction, all I could think about was coming back here to you, to someone who sees me as human instead of just a name or a threat or an opportunity. He moved to the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass. But being close to me puts you in danger. Victor already knows you have the watch, which means he knows you're connected to me. The Albanians now know I'm actively investigating my mother's death, which makes anyone associated with me a potential target. And if we cross the line from professional to personal, if people know you matter to me beyond being an employee, you become leverage. I crossed the room to stand beside him. You're trying to protect me by pushing me away. I'm trying to be realistic about what being with me would mean. It's not just about danger from outside. It's about the life itself, the secrets, the violence, the moral compromises. You're good, Vanessa. Genuinely good. You shouldn't be dragged into this world. For 3 years, I'd watched Roberto make decisions for other people, always certain he knew what was best. I'd never challenged him, never pushed back. But this wasn't about business or strategy. This was about us, and he didn't get to decide unilaterally what I could or couldn't handle. That's not your choice to make, I said firmly. He turned to look at me, surprise flickering across his face. You don't get to decide what I can handle or what I'm willing to risk. Yes, being close to you is dangerous, but walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what if is its own kind of danger. I've spent too much of my life being invisible, playing it safe, never taking chances because I was afraid of getting hurt. I stepped closer, holding his gaze. My parents died when I was 15. One moment they were there, the next they were gone, and I never got to tell them all the things I should have said. My aunt raised me, loved me, and I lost her too. I know how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change. So don't tell me to walk away to keep me safe, because safety isn't the same thing as living. Roberto's jaw tightened, emotions warring across his face. You don't understand what you're saying yes to. Then help me understand. But don't make this decision for me and pretend it's for my benefit. I'm already involved emotionally. I'm already in danger if Victor or anyone else wants to use me against you. Keeping distance now doesn't change that. Vanessa, I lost my parents, my aunt, everyone I loved. And yes, that hurt. But you know what hurt more? All the things I didn't say. All the moments I wasted being careful instead of honest. I'm not going to do that again. Not with you. The silence that followed felt charged, electric. Roberto's hands flexed at his sides, and I could see him fighting against every instinct that told him to maintain control, to keep distance, to protect me even from himself. If we do this, he said finally, voice low and strained, there's no going back. Once you're truly part of my life, you can't unsee what you'll see. You can't unhear the conversations or unknow the things you'll learn about what I do, who I am. I already know who you are. I've worked for you for 3 years. I've seen you make hard decisions, seen you protect the people under your care, seen you carry the weight of responsibility that would crush most people. I'm not naive, Roberto. I know you're not a saint, but I also know you're not a monster. He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to frame my face. "You have too much faith in me. I have exactly the right amount." We stood there, foreheads almost touching, breathing the same air. The tension between us was unbearable. Every nerve in my body screaming for him to close that final distance, to stop talking about barriers and just let himself feel. "I want to kiss you," he admitted, voice rough. "I've wanted to for longer than I care to admit. But once I start, I won't want to stop. And that terrifies me because I've spent 12 years building walls, and you've walked through every single one without even trying. Then maybe it's time to stop being terrified." His thumb traced my lower lip. The touch feather-light but devastating. "Tomorrow, the Albanians will deliver whatever information they have. I'll be one step closer to knowing who killed my mother. Everything in my life is about to change. I know, and you're still standing here, knowing all that, asking me to let you in. I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you, I'm already in, Roberto. I've been in for a long time. The only question is whether you're brave enough to admit the same thing." Something broke in his expression, the last of his resistance crumbling. But instead of kissing me, instead of giving in to the attraction that had been building for days, he pulled me into his arms and just held me, tightly, desperately, like I was an anchor in a storm he'd been weathering alone for too long. "I'm brave enough," he whispered against my hair. "I just needed to know you were sure. I'm sure." We stood there in his living room, wrapped in each other, city lights twinkling beyond the windows. We hadn't kissed, hadn't crossed that final physical line. But we'd crossed something more fundamental. We'd admitted the truth, stripped away pretense, and chosen each other despite every logical reason not to. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new information, new complications. But tonight, in the quiet safety of his home, we allowed ourselves this moment of honesty, this acknowledgement that whatever came next, we would face it together. And that simple truth felt more intimate than any kiss could have been. New Year's Eve arrived with gray skies and the promise of snow. Roberto spent most of December 31st on the phone, his voice sharp and controlled as he coordinated with Joseph and other associates. The Albanians had promised delivery of documents by end of day, and the tension in the brownstone was thick enough to cut. I'd made coffee 3 times already, more for something to do with my hands than because anyone actually needed it. We'd crossed an emotional threshold the night before, admitted feelings we'd both been hiding, but the physical distance between us remained. Roberto was focused entirely on the investigation, and I understood why. This was what mattered. What had mattered for 12 years. Everything else, including us, had to wait. Joseph arrived at noon carrying a sealed box and a laptop. His expression was grim as he set both on the dining room table Roberto had converted into a makeshift command center. "They came through," Joseph said without preamble. "Everything they claimed to have. Crime scene photos, internal communications, and a recording." "A recording?" Roberto's voice was carefully neutral, but I saw his hands tighten on the edge of the table. "Confession. Arben Krasniki made it 3 weeks before he died, apparently as insurance or maybe just to clear his conscience. His nephew Victor had it, turned it over as part of the deal with the Albanians." Roberto opened the box methodically, pulling out folders and envelopes. I watched him work, saw the control he maintained even as his world was potentially about to shift again. He opened the first folder, and I caught a glimpse of photographs before he angled them away from my view. Crime scene images, I realized. His mother's death, captured in clinical detail. "Vanessa, you don't need to see this," he said quietly. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." I retreated, giving him space but staying close enough to be available. Through the doorway, I could see him and Joseph reviewing documents, their voices too low for me to hear clearly. An hour passed, then another. I occupied myself cleaning counters that were already clean, organizing cabinets that were already organized. Then I heard it. Roberto's voice, raised in a way I'd never heard before. "No, that's not possible. Check again." I moved to the doorway. Roberto was standing now, hands braced on the table, staring at Joseph with an expression of absolute disbelief. "Boss, I've checked 3 times. The documents are clear." "What documents?" Roberto's voice was dangerous now, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. Joseph pulled up something on the laptop, turning it so Roberto could see. Banking records from 12 years ago. Wire transfers, all coded. But when you track them through the various accounts, they all originate from the same source. Someone within the Pellagrini organization paid the Albanians $40,000 2 weeks before your mother died. The silence that followed was deafening. I stayed frozen in the doorway, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever was happening. Who? Roberto's voice was barely above a whisper. Joseph pulled up another document. The account belongs to a shell company. It took some digging, but the company was registered to Silvio Pellagrini. I watched the color drain from Roberto's face. Silvio. His uncle. His father's brother. Family. No. Roberto shook his head, denial written across every line of his body. Silvio was at that business dinner with my father the night it happened. He was devastated when we got the news. He helped plan the funeral. I know, boss. But the evidence doesn't lie. And there's more. Joseph pulled up additional files. 6 months before your mother died, there were significant discrepancies in the organization's books. Money missing, shipments unaccounted for. I pulled the old audit files. Your mother was the one who discovered it. Understanding dawned on Roberto's face, horrible and complete. She found out he was stealing. Yeah. And based on the timeline, she confronted him about 2 weeks before her death. There's a notation in her day planner. It just says, talk to S, gave him chance to make it right. She gave him a chance. Roberto's voice broke. She was trying to protect family, and he killed her for it. I couldn't stay away anymore. I crossed to Roberto, placing my hand on his arm. He was shaking, I realized, every muscle tense with rage and grief and betrayal so profound I couldn't begin to comprehend it. Are you absolutely certain? Roberto asked Joseph. And I heard the desperate hope in his voice that maybe, somehow, this was wrong. I spent the last 6 hours verifying. The Albanians provided phone records showing calls between Arben Krasniqi and a number registered to Silvio. The recording Krasniqi made names him specifically. There's no doubt, boss. Your uncle ordered your mother's death. Roberto turned away from us both, walking to the window with careful, measured steps. Like if he moved too fast, he'd shatter completely. Where is he now? His voice was cold, empty of everything except a fury so deep it had gone beyond heat, into ice. At his estate in Westchester. I haven't contacted him yet. Wanted to brief you first. Bring him here. Tonight. Tell him it's urgent family business related to New Year's planning. Don't let him know we suspect anything. Boss. Do it, Joseph. After Joseph left, I stood in the middle of the dining room, unsure whether to approach Roberto or give him space. He'd turned to stone at that window, his reflection visible in the glass, expression carved from grief and rage. Roberto, I said softly. He was at the funeral. His voice was distant, detached. He gave the eulogy, talked about how much he loved his sister-in-law, how the family would honor her memory, and the entire time he knew he'd ordered her death, and he stood there and pretended to mourn. I'm so sorry. My father trusted him. In those last 3 years before he died, Silvio was the one who helped manage things while my father fell apart. I trusted him. He's been part of my inner circle this entire time, sitting in meetings, giving advice. And he murdered my mother. He turned to face me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my chest ache. This wasn't just betrayal. This was the foundation of his entire life cracking apart. What are you going to do? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. I don't know. He rubbed his hands over his face. In my world, this kind of betrayal has one answer. But he's family. Blood. My father's brother. If I do what every instinct tells me to do, I become exactly what everyone fears I am. Or you choose justice over revenge. There's a difference. Is there, in this world? I crossed to him, taking his hands in mine. They were cold, trembling slightly. Yes. You've been looking for truth for 12 years, not just vengeance. Don't let finding that truth turn you into something your mother wouldn't recognize. He pulled me against him, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a world that had just proven itself unstable. We stood there for a long time, his heart beating hard against my chest, his breath uneven. When Joseph returned 3 hours later, he brought news that Silvio would arrive within the hour. Roberto had spent that time in his study, reviewing every document, listening to Krasniqi's recorded confession over and over. I'd heard pieces of it through the closed door. The old man's voice, weak with illness, describing how he'd been hired to make a woman's death look like a home invasion gone wrong. How he'd been paid $20,000 up front, $20,000 after. How he'd taken the watch because it was beautiful, and no one would miss it among all the chaos. How he'd felt guilty ever since, but not guilty enough to confess while it would have mattered. When the doorbell rang precisely at 8 o'clock, Roberto was waiting in the living room. He'd changed into a suit, black on black, looking every inch the man who ran an organization built on power and fear. But I could see the cost of that composure, the way his jaw was locked, the muscle twitching in his cheek. Joseph showed Silvio in. He was in his early 60s, gray hair combed back, expensive casual clothes. He looked relaxed, unsuspecting, and I felt my stomach turn watching him embrace Roberto like nothing was wrong. "Nephew, Happy New Year. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until tomorrow?" "Sit down, Uncle." Roberto's voice gave nothing away. Silvio took a seat on the sofa, finally noticing me standing near the doorway. "Who's this?" "My secretary. She's part of this conversation." Something flickered in Silvio's eyes. Wariness, maybe. But he nodded. "All right, what's going on?" Roberto pulled out his phone and pressed play. Arben Krasniqi's voice filled the room, telling the story of how he'd been hired by a man named Silvio Pellagrini to kill a woman named Juliana. How he'd broken into the house on December 26th. How he'd made it look random. How he'd taken only the watch as his trophy. The color drained from Silvio's face. He started to stand, but Joseph had moved behind the sofa, a silent wall blocking any escape. "Sit down," Roberto said, and the command in his voice was absolute. Silvio sank back into the cushions. "Roberto, I can explain." "Don't." Roberto's control was fracturing now, fury bleeding through. "Don't you dare try to explain murdering my mother. She was going to destroy me. She found the discrepancies, the missing money. She said she'd give me 2 weeks to return it, or she'd tell your father. I panicked. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Roberto's laugh was bitter and broken. "You hired someone to kill her. You stood at her funeral and lied to everyone who loved her. You watched my father die of grief and said nothing. You've sat in my meetings for 3 years, advising me, pretending to care about this family while knowing what you'd done. That's not a mistake. That's evil." Silvio's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I've regretted it every day since. Not enough to confess. Not enough to face consequences. You let me spend 12 years not knowing, wondering, carrying that weight. You let me think it was random violence when it was calculated murder." I saw Roberto's hands flex, saw him fighting every instinct for violence. This was the moment that would define him, I realized. Would he choose the path his world expected? Or would he find another way? "Joseph, take him to the property in Connecticut. Secure room, full guard. No communication with anyone. Boss, what are you going to do?" "I'm calling a family meeting. Everyone needs to know what he did. And then we'll decide together what justice looks like." Silvio started to protest, but Roberto cut him off with a single look. "You don't get to speak anymore. You lost that right 12 years ago." After Joseph escorted Silvio out, the brownstone fell into heavy silence. I stayed where I was, giving Roberto space to process, to feel whatever he needed to feel. He stood motionless for several minutes, staring at nothing. Then, like a dam breaking, his legs gave out. He sank onto the sofa, head in his hands, and a sound came out of him that broke my heart. Raw, anguished grief, finally released after being held back for over a decade. I crossed to him immediately, kneeling in front of him, pulling his hands away from his face. His eyes were wet, tears tracking down his cheeks, and he looked younger suddenly, like the boy who'd lost his mother and never fully processed that loss. "I trusted him," Roberto whispered. "He was family. He was supposed to protect her. And instead he killed her." I moved onto the sofa beside him, and he collapsed against me, shoulders shaking. I held him while he cried. the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that came from years of suppressed pain, finally finding release. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm sorry. I should be stronger than this." "No. You should be exactly this. Human. Grieving. You've been strong for 12 years. Tonight you get to break." We sat there for over an hour while Roberto worked through emotions he'd never let himself fully feel. The betrayal, the rage, the grief for his mother and his father, the loss of innocence and trust. All of it poured out while I held him, offering the only thing I could. My presence, my acceptance, my refusal to leave him alone in this darkness. Eventually, his breathing steadied. The tears stopped. He pulled back slightly, looking at me with eyes that were red but somehow clearer than before. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for not being afraid of this. I'm not afraid of your pain, Roberto. I'm honored you trust me enough to show it." He lifted one hand to my face, thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized I'd shed. "I don't know what happens next. With Silvio, with the family, with any of it, but I know I don't want to face it without you. You won't have to." We sat there in the lamplight, the city celebrating New Year's Eve beyond the windows, with distant fireworks and champagne. But inside the brownstone, we were in our own world, stripped bare of pretense and protection, seeing each other completely for the first time. Roberto leaned forward slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. When his lips met mine, it wasn't desperate or rushed. It was deliberate, certain, a promise made without words. I kissed him back, tasting salt from his tears, feeling the tremor in his hands as they cupped my face. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. "I love you," he whispered. "I've been fighting it for so long, but I can't anymore. I love you, Vanessa." My heart felt too full for my chest. "I love you too. I have for longer than I knew how to admit." He kissed me again, and this time there was heat beneath the tenderness. Want and need mixing with emotion until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. But even as desire built between us, he pulled back, breathing hard. "Not like this. Not tonight when everything is chaos and pain. When I make love to you for the first time. I want it to be about us, not about grief or escape." I nodded, understanding even as my body protested. "Okay, but stay with me tonight? Just sleep beside me? I don't want to be alone. I'm not going anywhere." We moved upstairs to his bedroom, a space I'd never entered before. It was unexpectedly simple. A large bed, minimal furniture, more books, human and real, just like the man beside me. We lay down fully clothed on top of the covers, and Roberto pulled me against him, his arm secure around my waist. In the distance, we heard midnight fireworks, the city marking the arrival of a new year. "Happy New Year," I whispered. "Happy New Year, Vanessa." And despite everything that had happened, despite the pain and betrayal and uncertainty ahead, lying there in Roberto's arms felt like the truest beginning I'd ever experienced. We'd been stripped down to our most vulnerable selves and chosen each other anyway. Whatever came next, we'd meet it side by side. For the first time in 12 years, Roberto slept soundly, his breathing deep and even. And watching him finally find peace, I understood that love wasn't just about the beautiful moments. It was about being present for the broken ones too. About holding someone while they shattered and helping them find their way back to whole. The week following New Year's was a blur of preparation. Roberto spent every waking hour coordinating with Joseph, making calls to family members and associates, arranging for what he called a formal assembly. I understood what it really was. A trial, conducted not in a courtroom, but in the world Roberto inhabited, where justice followed different rules. I'd moved some of my things to the brownstone, not officially, but practically. Courtney had helped me pack a bag during a brief trip to my apartment, her expression caught between concern and grudging support. "Just promise me you know what you're doing," she'd said, folding my clothes with more care than necessary. "I don't, but I'm doing it anyway. That's either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever heard you say. I'm still deciding which." Now, standing in Roberto's study on January 7th, watching him review his presentation one more time. I felt the weight of what was about to happen. Tonight, the entire Pellagrini organization would learn that one of their own had murdered Juliana. That trust had been shattered from within in the most fundamental way possible. "Are you ready for this?" I asked quietly. Roberto looked up from the documents spread across his desk. He'd barely slept in days, the exhaustion showing in the shadows under his eyes. But his expression was calm, resolved. "No, but it has to be done. The family deserves to know the truth, and Silvio deserves to face what he did in front of everyone he betrayed." Joseph entered without knocking, his usual efficiency tinged with something heavier. Everyone's arrived. 43 people total, all the major families and key associates. They know this is serious, but they don't know why yet. "Where's Silvio?" "Secured room downstairs. 2 guards, waiting." Roberto stood, buttoning his suit jacket with mechanical precision. Then he turned to me, and some of the hardness in his expression softened. "I need you there. Not as my secretary, but as someone I trust. Someone who knows the whole story. Can you do that?" "Of course." He crossed to me, taking my hand briefly. The touch was warm, grounding. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever decisions get made, I need you to remember something. I'm choosing mercy not because I'm weak, but because you showed me there's another path. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The assembly was held in the building's main conference floor, a space I'd arranged catering for dozens of times but had never actually attended a meeting in. Tonight, it was packed with men in expensive suits, a few women who held positions of authority within various family operations. The air was thick with anticipation and wariness. Roberto walked to the front of the room with absolute confidence, and the conversations died immediately. He commanded attention without effort, his presence filling the space in a way that made even the most powerful people in attendance lean forward, ready to listen. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, his voice carrying clearly. "What I'm about to share will shock many of you. Some of you may find it hard to believe, but I ask that you listen to everything before making judgments." He nodded to Joseph, who began distributing folders to everyone in attendance. I watched faces change as people opened them, saw the bank records, the photographs, the documented evidence of Silvio's betrayal. 12 years ago, my mother Juliana was murdered in our home. It was made to look like a robbery, random violence. But it wasn't random. She was killed because she discovered financial discrepancies within our organization, because she gave someone a chance to make things right, and because that person chose murder over accountability. The room had gone completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. That person was my uncle, Silvio Pellagrini. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, denials, angry murmurs. Several people stood, shouting questions. Roberto waited, letting the initial shock wash through the room before raising his hand for silence. "I have evidence, banking records showing payments to the Albanian organization that provided the killer. Phone records connecting Silvio to Arben Krasniki, the man who carried out the murder. And I have a recorded confession from Krasniki himself, made before his death, naming Silvio specifically." He played the recording. Krasniki's weak, dying voice filled the conference room, describing in detail how he'd been hired, how much he'd been paid, how he'd made Juliana's death look like a home invasion. When the recording mentioned taking only the pocket watch as a trophy, I saw several people glance at Roberto's desk, where that same watch now sat in a glass case. When the recording ended, the silence was even heavier than before. "Bring him in," Roberto said quietly. Joseph and 2 other men escorted Silvio into the room. He looked smaller than he had a week ago, diminished by the weight of his exposed secrets. His eyes darted around the room, seeing the accusation and disgust on familiar faces. "Silvio." Roberto's voice was cold, empty. "You've heard the evidence. Everyone here has heard it. Do you deny it?" Silvio's mouth opened and closed. He looked like he wanted to lie, to manufacture some explanation that would make this all go away. But faced with irrefutable proof and the stares of an entire organization, he couldn't do it. "I don't deny it." His voice was barely audible. "Juliana found discrepancies in the books. Money I'd taken over several years. She confronted me, gave me 2 weeks to return it. I panicked. I thought if she was gone, the investigation would stop. You thought murdering my mother would solve your financial problems. Roberto's control was impressive, but I could see the fury beneath it, the grief he was containing through sheer force of will. I was weak. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake is forgetting an appointment or miscalculating a sum. You planned and executed the murder of a woman who was trying to protect you, who gave you a chance to fix your errors. You watched my father die of grief, knowing you'd caused it. You advised me for 3 years while I searched for answers you had all along. That's not weakness. That's calculated evil. Several people in the room nodded, their judgment clear. Silvio had violated the most fundamental rule. Family was sacred. You protected family. You didn't destroy it from within. An older man I recognized as Anthony Costa, one of the longest-serving associates, stood. What are you proposing, Roberto? What justice do you seek? This was the moment everything balanced on. I could feel the room holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of leader Roberto would prove himself to be. Would he choose violence, the expected path in this world? Or would he find another way? Roberto looked at Silvio for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decision made after careful thought. My mother was many things. She was strong, fierce when she needed to be, but she also believed in mercy, especially within family. She gave Silvio a chance to make things right before exposing him. She valued redemption over retribution. He paused, letting that sink in. Silvio will be exiled permanently from this family and this city. All his assets, property, and holdings will be confiscated and redistributed. He will be escorted out of New York tonight and will never be permitted to return. If he attempts contact with any family member or associate, if he returns to this territory, the mercy ends and traditional justice applies. Another associate stood, younger, more aggressive. That's too lenient. He murdered Juliana. He deserves to die for that. Perhaps. Roberto's gaze swept the room. But if I kill him, I become what people fear most about this life. I become someone my mother wouldn't recognize. Silvio will live, but he'll live knowing he destroyed everything through his own cowardice. He'll live alone, stripped of family, of respect, of everything that gave his life meaning. For a man like him, that's a worse punishment than death. Anthony Costa nodded slowly. It takes more strength to show mercy than to pull a trigger. Your mother would be proud of this decision, Roberto. Not everyone agreed. I could see the discontent on some faces, the belief that Roberto was being weak. But the older associates, the ones who'd known Juliana, seemed to understand what he was doing. He was honoring her memory not through violence, but through the values she'd held, all in favor of exile and asset seizure, Roberto called. The majority of hands rose. Not unanimous, but clear enough. Those opposed? About a dozen hands. Roberto noted them, his expression unreadable. The decision stands. Silvio Pellagrini is hereby exiled from this family and all associated territories. Joseph, see it done. As Joseph and his men escorted Silvio out, the man finally looked at Roberto directly. I am sorry. For what it's worth, I truly am sorry. It's worth nothing, Roberto replied, but you'll have the rest of your life to contemplate that. After Silvio was gone, Roberto dismissed the assembly. People filed out slowly, many stopping to express support or to question the leniency of the sentence. Roberto handled each interaction with the same controlled professionalism, never letting his personal feelings show. When the last person had left, when it was just Joseph, me, and Roberto in the empty conference room, I saw him finally allow himself to breathe. His shoulders sagged slightly, the weight he'd been carrying visible in every line of his body. You did the right thing, Joseph said quietly. Not everyone will see it immediately, but history will prove you right. I hope so, because that might have been the hardest decision I've ever made. After Joseph left to coordinate Silvio's exile, Roberto and I stood alone in the conference room. The evidence folders were still scattered across the table, physical reminders of the betrayal that had shaped so much of his life. How do you feel? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Empty. Relieved. Angry still, but differently. Like I can finally grieve properly now that I know the truth. Your mother would be proud of you. The way you handled that, the mercy you showed while still seeking justice. That took incredible strength. I learned it from you. He turned to face me fully. Before you came into my life, before you gave me that watch and started this entire investigation, I would have killed him, without hesitation, without mercy. But you showed me that strength comes in different forms. I crossed to him, taking his hands in mine. You showed yourself that. I just gave you permission to see it. We stood there in the empty conference room, city lights visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This man had just faced down his worst nightmare, had confronted the person who'd destroyed his family, and had chosen a path that defied expectations. Vanessa, I need to tell you something. His voice was serious, but not sad. Determined. Okay. When I hired you 3 years ago, I never imagined you'd become essential to my existence. I never thought I'd trust anyone enough to let them see me break. I never believed I could find someone who would stand beside me through something like this and not run away screaming. I'm not going anywhere. I know, and that's why I need to say this properly, not in the middle of grief or investigation or crisis. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the strength I knew resided in those fingers. I love you. Not because you saved me, or because you helped solve my mother's murder. I love you because you see the human underneath the reputation. Because you laugh at things I say when I'm not trying to be funny. Because you make excellent coffee and remember conversations I barely remember having. Because you're brave and kind and real in a world full of pretense. My heart felt too full for my chest. I love you too. For exactly 3 years now, I've loved you. Even when you barely knew I existed. Even when I thought nothing would ever happen between us. I loved you because you're more than what people see. You're thoughtful and careful, and you carry responsibility that would break most people. You're good, Roberto. Even when you don't believe it. He kissed me then, and it was different from the grief-stricken kiss on New Year's Eve. This was certainty, promise, the beginning of something built on truth and trust, rather than desperation or escape. His hands threaded through my hair, pulling me closer, and I felt him smile against my lips. Come home with me, he murmured. Really home. Not as my secretary, not as part of an investigation, as my partner. I thought I already was. You are. But I want it official. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours. We left the conference room hand in hand, and I realized that this moment, this simple gesture of walking together through empty hallways, meant more than any grand declaration. Roberto Pellagrini, who kept everyone at arm's length, was claiming me publicly, making it clear that I mattered, that we mattered. When we arrived back at the brownstone, the house felt different somehow, lighter, as if a darkness that had haunted it for 12 years had finally lifted. Roberto made us tea, a quiet domestic gesture that felt perfect for the moment. What happens now? I asked, as we sat together on the sofa, where we'd held each other through grief just days before. Now we figure out how to build a life together. You'll need to officially resign as my secretary, obviously. Can't have people thinking I'm taking advantage of my employee. What will I do instead? Whatever you want. You mentioned once that you'd thought about getting a degree in art history. Maybe you do that. Or maybe you help me with the legitimate side of the business. Or maybe you open that antique restoration shop you don't know I know you've always dreamed about. I stared at him. How did you know about that? I told you. I've always noticed you, Vanessa. Every time you lingered over an estate sale catalog or researched the provenance of some item. You light up when you talk about history, about the stories objects carry. I want you to do what makes you happy. Then the thoughtfulness of it, the fact that he'd been paying attention to details I thought I'd kept hidden, made my eyes sting with tears. I want to be with you, I said simply. However that looks, whatever that means. I want to wake up in your house and make terrible coffee together and listen to you play piano late at night. I want to be part of your life, not just an observer of it. You already are. He set his tea down and pulled me onto his lap, his arms secure around me. You've been part of my life since the moment you handed me that watch. Maybe even before that. I was just too stubborn to admit it. We sat there for a long time, wrapped in each other, processing everything that had happened. The investigation was over. Justice had been served, if not in the traditional sense. Roberto had closure, painful as it was, and we had each other, fully and honestly for the first time. "Thank you," Roberto said quietly, his lips brushing my temple, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself, for showing me that mercy isn't weakness, for loving me despite everything you learned about my world. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your pain, for seeing me when I felt invisible." Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm. Inside the brownstone, we'd found something rare and precious. Two people who'd been alone for too long, finally finding their way home to each other. The journey had been painful, the truth devastating. But sitting there in Roberto's arms, I knew with absolute certainty that every step had been necessary to bring us to this moment. We'd both been broken in different ways, but together, we were beginning to heal, and that felt like the most important truth of all. By the end of January, the reality of our relationship had settled into something both extraordinary and surprisingly ordinary. Roberto officially announced to the organization that I was no longer his secretary but his partner in every sense of the word. The reaction was mixed, some associates expressing genuine happiness, others viewing me with suspicion, wondering what kind of influence I'd have over their boss. Courtney's reaction was the one that mattered most to me after Roberto's. When I told her everything that had happened, sitting in her apartment with wine and takeout, she'd been quiet for a long time before speaking. "I'm terrified for you," she finally admitted. "But I also see how you look when you talk about him, how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. So I'm going to support this. But I'm also going to be here reminding you that you deserve happiness and safety in equal measure. I know, and I love you for it. Just promise me one thing. Don't lose yourself in his world. Keep being Vanessa, the woman who corrects grammar in internal memos and refuses to drink cheap coffee. Don't become someone you're not just to fit into his life." It was advice I carried with me as I navigated my new role. Roberto had been serious about me finding my own path, and after several long conversations, we'd decided I'd help oversee the legitimate business operations while pursuing art history classes part-time. It gave me purpose beyond our relationship, kept me grounded in my own identity. But I also used my position to push for changes I'd always believed were necessary. Better healthcare coverage for lower-level employees, educational scholarships for children of associates, investment in legal businesses that could provide stable income and employment. Roberto supported every suggestion, even when some of the older associates grumbled about unnecessary expenses. My mother believed that power came with responsibility, he told them during one contentious meeting. Not just to those at the top, but to everyone who depends on this organization. These changes honor her memory. That shut down most of the complaints. In February, on a cold morning with snow falling softly outside, Roberto took me to the cemetery where his parents were buried. We stood in front of Juliana's headstone, and I watched him trace her name with his fingers, his expression peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. "Mama, I want you to meet someone," he said quietly, and my throat tightened. "This is Vanessa. She's the woman who brought your watch back to me, who helped me find the truth about what happened to you. She's also the woman I love, and I hope that would make you happy." I knelt beside the grave, placing the flowers we'd brought. "I wish I could have known you. Roberto tells me you made the best pasta sauce in New York and that you could make anyone laugh. I promise I'll take care of him. I promise I'll remind him to eat and sleep, and that it's okay to be human sometimes." We sat there for a while, snow dusting our shoulders, and Roberto told stories about his mother I'd never heard. Funny ones, warm ones, memories that weren't stained by grief anymore. When we finally stood to leave, he pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket. My heart stopped. "I know this might seem fast," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "By conventional standards, we've only been officially together for 6 weeks, but we've known each other for 3 years, and I've loved you for most of that time even when I couldn't admit it. I don't want to wait anymore, Vanessa. Life is too short and too uncertain." He opened the box, revealing not a traditional engagement ring, but his mother's pocket watch, restored and polished until it gleamed. A delicate gold chain had been added, transforming it into something I could wear, This watch brought us together. It led me to truth and to you. I can't think of anything more meaningful to symbolize what I'm asking." He took my hand, his grip warm despite the cold. "Vanessa Morgan, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, knowing it won't be conventional or easy, but knowing that I will love you and honor you every single day?" Tears streamed down my face, freezing on my cheeks. "Yes. Absolutely yes." He fastened the watch around my neck, and it rested perfectly against my heart. Then he kissed me, soft and reverent, while snow fell around us, and his mother's memory blessed what we were becoming. We married in May, a small ceremony in the brownstones garden, with only close family and friends present. Courtney was my maid of honor, tears streaming down her face through the entire event. Joseph stood as Roberto's best man, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo but proud nonetheless. Roberto's vows made me cry. "You walked into my life with a simple gift and changed everything. You showed me that strength can be gentle, that power can be merciful, that I didn't have to face the darkness alone. I promised to protect you, to cherish you, to never take for granted the incredible gift of being loved by you." My own vows were simpler, but just as true. I spent 3 years watching you from a distance, thinking I was invisible, but you saw me all along, just like I saw you. I promised to stand beside you, to remind you of your humanity when the world tries to harden you, to love you through every season of our lives. Summer passed in a blur of adjusting to married life, of learning to share space completely rather than tentatively. Roberto taught me to cook his mother's recipes from a handwritten book Juliana had left behind. I taught him that it was okay to laugh at stupid movies and that not everything required strategic planning. In August, I woke up nauseous for the 3rd morning in a row. Roberto, ever observant, had already placed a pregnancy test on the bathroom counter. "Just in case," he'd said, trying to look casual and failing completely. 2 minutes later, staring at the positive result, we both stood in stunned silence. "We're having a baby," I whispered. Roberto's hand went to my still flat stomach, his expression transformed by wonder. "We're having a baby." He was protective before, but pregnancy turned him absolutely vigilant. Joseph had to physically stop him from wrapping me in bubble wrap when I insisted on walking downstairs. But beneath the hovering was genuine awe. He talked to my growing belly, read to it in Italian, played piano every night because he'd read that babies could hear music in the womb. "You're going to be such a good father," I told him one evening as we lay in bed, his hand resting on my stomach where our daughter was kicking. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "What if I don't know how? What if I mess this up? Then we'll mess it up together and figure it out as we go." That's what parents do. Autumn brought preparations for the baby's arrival. Roberto converted one of the spare rooms into a nursery, painting it himself in soft cream and gold tones. He commissioned a custom crib that matched the antique furniture throughout the house, ensuring our daughter would grow up surrounded by history and beauty. And he did something else, something that made me cry when he revealed it. He'd converted the brownstones basement into a full restoration workshop for me, complete with every tool and resource I could possibly need for antique restoration work. "You mentioned once that you loved bringing old things back to life," he said, showing me the space with shy pride. "That you liked finding forgotten treasures and making them beautiful again. You did that for me, Vanessa. You brought me back to life. This is so you can do it for other things too." Christmas arrived faster than seemed possible. 1 year exactly since I'd walked into that auction and bought a pocket watch that would change both our lives forever. The brownstone was decorated for the holidays, Roberto having gone slightly overboard with lights and garlands, because he wanted our daughter's first Christmas, even in utero, to be special. We hosted a family dinner on Christmas Eve, the house full of warmth and laughter, and the smell of Juliana's recipes that Roberto had spent all day preparing. Associates and their families filled the rooms, children playing while adults talked. It was the kind of gathering his mother used to host, he told me, the kind he'd missed for 12 years. As dinner wound down and people gathered in the living room, Roberto stood with his wine glass, calling for attention. I sat on the sofa, 5 months pregnant and glowing according to everyone who'd commented, wearing the pocket watch over my dress. A year ago tonight, I received a Christmas gift that changed everything. Roberto began, his eyes finding mine across the room, a simple pocket watch that my secretary had found at an auction. She didn't know what it would unleash, neither did I. But that gift led to truth, to justice, and most importantly, to love. He crossed to where I sat, taking my hand and helping me stand. Vanessa showed me that the most valuable things in life aren't bought with money or power. They're found in unexpected places by people brave enough to take chances. She found a lost piece of my history and returned it. In doing so, she returned parts of me I thought were gone forever. His hand rested on my stomach, our daughter kicking against his palm, as if she knew her father was talking about her too. This year we gained truth about the past. We gained justice, painful as it was. We gained each other, and soon we'll gain a daughter who will grow up knowing her grandmother's story, knowing that mercy is stronger than vengeance, and knowing that sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. He raised his glass. To Juliana, who taught me what family truly means. To Vanessa, who reminded me I was still capable of being human. And to all of you, for being part of a family that's learning to honor the past while building a better future. Everyone raised their glasses, voices mixing in agreement and celebration. Courtney, sitting nearby with her new boyfriend, was crying openly and not even trying to hide it. After everyone left and we were cleaning up, Roberto found me in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, my movements slow with exhaustion and pregnancy. "Leave it," he said, taking the plate from my hands. "Teresa will handle it tomorrow. Come sit with me." We settled on the sofa in the living room, city lights twinkling beyond the windows, the Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner. Roberto pulled me against him, careful of my belly, and we sat in comfortable silence. "Are you happy?" he asked after a while. I thought about the question seriously, considering the past year. The investigation, the betrayal, the danger, the complications, but also the love, the trust, the family I'd gained after years of being alone. "I'm happier than I ever imagined being," I answered honestly. I spent so much of my life feeling like I was on the outside looking in. My parents died, my aunt died, and I was just this person floating through the world without anchor. "You gave me somewhere to belong. You gave that to me too," he said quietly. "After my mother died, and then my father, I locked myself away, told myself that connection was dangerous, that caring about people just gave enemies leverage. You proved all of that wrong." His hand found the pocket watch at my neck, lifting it gently. "My mother would have loved you. She would have loved how you stood up to me, how you pushed for changes in the organization, how you see the good in people while still being realistic about their flaws. I wish I could have known her. You know her through me. Every time I choose mercy over violence, every time I consider what's right instead of just what's expedient, that's her influence. And now it's yours too." Our daughter kicked hard, making us both laugh. Roberto leaned down and spoke to my belly in Italian. Words I'd learned meant things like "little star" and "my heart." "She's going to be so loved," I said, blinking back tears that pregnancy had made all too easy. "She's going to know her grandmother's story," Roberto agreed. "She's going to grow up understanding that strength comes in many forms, that family is worth protecting, and that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest gestures." I thought about that auction a year ago, about the instinct that had drawn me to a pocket watch with initials I recognized, about the decision to spend money I couldn't afford on a gift for a man who barely knew I existed, about every choice that had led to this moment, sitting in a beautiful home with a husband I adored, and a daughter on the way. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to that auction?" I asked. "Every day," Roberto admitted. "And every day I'm grateful you did. You could have walked past it, could have decided $300 was too much, could have given the watch to me and walked away when you learned about the danger. But you didn't. You stayed. Even when staying was hard, I couldn't leave. Even if I'd wanted to, which I didn't, I couldn't leave you to face all of that alone." He kissed my temple, then my cheek, then finally my lips, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Vanessa Pellagrini." Thank you for being brave enough to give a broken man a simple gift. Thank you for staying when things got complicated. Thank you for showing me that life after loss is possible. I love you too. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for building this life with me. We sat there as midnight approached, the final hours of Christmas Eve ticking away. The pocket watch against my chest kept time, steady and certain, a reminder of where we'd been and where we were going. Outside, the city that had witnessed both tragedy and triumph continued its endless rhythm. But inside our home, wrapped in each other's arms with our daughter moving between us, we'd found something rare and precious. We'd found healing in honesty, strength in vulnerability, and love in the most unexpected places. A year ago, I'd been invisible, lonely, secretly in love with a man I thought would never see me as more than an employee. Now I was his wife, his partner, the mother of his child. I belonged to a family, had purpose beyond survival, and woke up every morning beside someone who loved me not despite my ordinariness, but because of it. The pocket watch had been a gift, yes, but the real gift had been the courage to offer it, to step out of invisibility and into a life that was messy and complicated and more beautiful than anything I'd imagined. As Roberto's hand rested protectively over our daughter, and his lips brushed my hair, I understood that some stories don't have neat endings. They have new beginnings, chapters that unfold in unexpected ways, characters who transform through love and loss and choice. This was ours, imperfect, unconventional, forged through pain, but tempered by hope, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it.